after Susan Collins was finally finished sucking up as much attention as she possibly could by pretending to be undecided about whether or not she'd vote to confirm Brett Kavanaugh, she then decided to milk the media for a little bit more attention by going on Sunday shows and talking about why she decided to vote for Brett Kavanaugh. But I think she's beginning to learn that not all press is good press, because her indecisiveness is exactly what gave grassroots supporters enough time to raise more than $3.6 million between 100,000 people for her future 2020 opponent. And after she finally announced her decision that she would in fact be voting for Kavanaugh, there were so many people that tried to contribute to her future opponent that she actually crashed CrowdPAC's website. So the people are onto you, Susan. They know that you were just pretending to be undecided, as you always do. I mean, you always pretend to be undecided. Jeff Flake does the same thing. Heidi Heitkamp does the same thing. Joe Manchin does the same thing. But I think that you're kind of a special case in this instance, Susan, because you really went above and beyond to milk it. You gave us a 45-minute speech, and finally, towards the end, after keeping us on the edge of our seats, you admitted that you're going to, unsurprisingly, do what you always do: vote along party lines. So I'm tired of her. And I absolutely support this effort to fund her a future opponent. Now look, I'm against money in politics, but certainly we need money to defeat corporate Democrats and Republicans. And the way we do that and keep candidates actually pure, for lack of a better term, is by raising money through grassroots individual donors. And that's exactly what this is. So I absolutely support this initiative. However, Susan Collins, she is not happy about this. In fact, in an interview with CBS, she actually said that these voters who are funding her future opponent, well, they're committing a quid pro quo, and this is tantamount to bribery, insinuating that this might actually be illegal.
This is a classic quid pro quo as defined in our bribery laws. They are asking me to perform an official act, and if I do not do what they want, $2 million plus is going to go to my opponent. I think that if our politics has come to the point where people are trying to buy votes and buy positions, that we are in a very sad place.
So that clip right there is evidence that Susan Collins has absolutely no idea what she's talking about. She's just butthurt at the fact that she pissed off her constituents in a blue state by voting for one of the most egregious Supreme Court picks in modern history. And it's not just that we dislike Brett Kavanaugh because he is accused of attempted rape by Christine Blasey Ford and sexual assault by Deborah Ramirez, but we also dislike him because he's overtly political, and also he's constitutionally illiterate. He's against the Fourth Amendment, and he would vote to dismantle the Fourth Amendment if you look at his other rulings. He's against net neutrality. So this is someone who is dangerous, and she voted to confirm him. That's why they're angry. But when they raise money, her constituents and grassroots activists across the country raise money to bankroll her inevitable 2020 opponent, what does she do? Well, she cries about it being corruption and being bribery that's actually comparable to a quid pro quo, because they're trying to buy votes. No, that's not buying votes, Susan Collins. What they're doing is demanding that you actually represent them, and if you don't, then what they're going to do is fund your opponent and get someone who will represent them. And think about how ridiculous this is. So last year, when the Koch network threatened to cut off their piggy bank to Republicans unless they passed either healthcare or tax reform, well, what did Republicans do months later? They ended up passing tax reform, exactly as their donors demanded. And that, in fact, was a bill that Susan Collins voted for. So by her own standards, that was a very clear quid pro quo, because the Koch brothers literally bought their votes. They bought the votes of the Republican Party, an entire party. What did Susan Collins have to say about that? What did she say about the Koch brothers trying to influence votes by using money? Nothing. When voters try to fund her opponent, that's vote buying. That's bribery. That's a quid pro quo. When the Koch brothers do it, that's just politics as usual, according to Susan Collins. And look, I've got even more examples to show you just how little Susan Collins cares about corruption. So, throughout her career, Susan Collins took more than $600,000 from the defense industry, and can you guess what she also did? She voted for the Iraq War, and also she voted to expand the military budget recently. She also took $3.6 million from the financial services industry and then voted to deregulate the big banks and roll back Dodd-Frank. She's also taken $1.8 million overall from the health industry, and she does not support Medicare for all. So it turns out that Susan Collins knows quite a bit about vote buying and corruption and bribery and quid pro quos because she's just as corrupt as anybody else in the Senate. The difference here is that she's only outraged about money in politics and speaks out against it if it's thousands of Americans coming together to raise money collectively with small donations to fund her opponent. That's when she's going to speak up about money in politics. But when the Koch brothers do it and say that they're going to cut off access to the piggy bank if Republicans don't do exactly as they demand, she has nothing to say about that. You're a hypocrite, Susan Collins. You're a hypocrite, and we're all onto your plan. You pretend to be undecided for weeks, suck up as much media coverage as possible, get as much attention as possible, and then you do what you always do. You vote along party lines with Republicans. So I absolutely support this effort. I absolutely support funding her inevitable opponent. And it does seem as if Susan Rice has expressed interest in possibly challenging her and getting that money. But I think we can do better than Susan Rice. I think we can find a true progressive in Maine who can actually represent the people in a way that Susan Collins refuses to do. Because if you try, as a constituent, to get a hold of her or put pressure on her, she's going to accuse you of trying to bribe her. So clearly, she doesn't want to hear from you. So we need someone in there that actually does want to hear from their constituents. And that person is not Susan Collins. So if Susan doesn't like that people across America are actually standing up to these corrupt politicians like her, then that's too bad. And I wish that we could set up 100 different crowdfunding campaigns for every single member of the Senate, every single one of them. And anytime they do something bad, we donate and fund their future opponent. Because if there's one thing that pisses off these corrupt politicians, it's making them have to work harder to keep their job. So I say we do this for everyone. Lindsey Graham, I think there's already one for Lindsey Graham, if I'm not mistaken. If you say, represent me because I voted for you, that means nothing to them. If you say, if you do not represent me and I will donate to your opponent in response, that actually seems to be something that concerns them. So I say we set up crowdfunding campaigns for every single one of these corrupt assholes. And anytime they do something that's bad, that's antithetical to democracy, that flies in the face of what American voters want, we fund their future politicians, because I don't just want to accept that, well, this person, they're not up for re-election until 2020 or 2022. I say we take action now. And if we start early, imagine the fund that their future opponent will have. It'd be amazing. So I'm all for this. I think this is a phenomenal move, and really it's a brilliant strategy to get politicians to actually pay attention to voters for once.
Support this podcast by becoming a patron at patreon.com/Humanist Report.